In the mist-covered hills of Fayette County, Kentucky, the year 1834 carried with it a strange stillness, the kind that made dogs howl at empty roads and farmers cross themselves before sunrise. Among the whispers that drifted across that quiet land, one story lingered longer than any storm: the birth of the M.C. Allister twins, two sisters whose existence would challenge not only faith but science itself. Their mother, Margaret M.C. Allister, was a fragile woman of 27 who had endured 3 miscarriages before conceiving again. Her husband, Thomas, was a stoic farmer who believed in omens and the wrath of God more than medicine. When Margaret's labor began on the night of a red harvest moon, the midwife reportedly muttered, "This ain't a night for bringing life into the world," yet there was no stopping what was coming. The birth took 6 hours. The first child emerged crying, strong, loud, alive. But when the second arrived, silence filled the room. The midwife thought she was stillborn, until both infants opened their eyes at the same moment. Eyes of the same pale gray, moving together as if commanded by an unseen hand. The midwife dropped her scissors. "Twins," she whispered, "but one soul." From that night on, the McAllister home became a place of both awe and dread. The girls, Clara and Elise, grew faster than most children. They rarely spoke separately, often finishing each other's words with eerie precision. When one fell and scraped her knee, the other would cry, though untouched. When one laughed, the other smiled in perfect time, as if their emotions were choreographed by some invisible puppeteer. By the time they turned 6, the townspeople had stopped visiting the farm. It wasn't just the synchronized movements, it was the night sounds. People swore they could hear the twins humming the same tune through their windows long after dark, a melody that made even stray dogs whimper. The church soon took notice. Reverend Samuel Blythe, a rigid man who saw sin in every shadow, claimed the twins were an affront to divine order. He demanded they be brought for blessing, though in truth, many believed he intended an exorcism. The ritual was held under the flickering light of black candles. Witnesses said the girls began to tremble, one weeping and the other laughing uncontrollably. Then, suddenly, Elise's laughter stopped. Her head tilted back. Her eyes rolled white, and she fell silent forever. But death didn't separate them. Over the following days, Clara refused to eat or sleep. When doctors examined her, they claimed her heartbeat came in irregular patterns. One beat, then a pause, as if waiting for another heart to answer. Even more chilling, Elise's body refused to decay. It remained warm to the touch for 3 days after death, her eyes open as though she were still listening. In the following months, Thomas buried Elise under the old ash tree near the barn. Yet each morning the soil over her grave seemed disturbed, as if something beneath had shifted during the night. And sometimes, when the wind moved through the fields, the sound of 2 girls laughing could be heard faintly from the direction of the graveyard. Years later, when the new doctor, Alden Pierce, came to study Clara, he documented something that defied every known explanation. Her pulse and temperature changed whenever anyone mentioned her sister's name. During one examination, he placed a mirror before her face, and 2 reflections appeared. The M.C. Allister twins became legend, part of Kentucky's haunted folklore, part of medical speculation, and part of the unsolved. No one could prove what truly happened between them, whether they were conjoined in soul, haunted by something supernatural, or trapped in a biological mystery centuries ahead of science. But even now, locals in Fayette County say that on nights when the harvest moon turns red, you can hear 2 small voices echoing through the woods, laughing, humming, calling for each other, and those who hear them never sleep soundly again. The night of October 13, 1834, began like any other in the quiet farming town of Fayette County, Kentucky, but by midnight, the world within the McAllister farmhouse shifted into something that no prayer could sanctify. The old windmill groaned against a rising storm as Margaret M.C. Allister cried out in labor. The midwife, Agnes Crowley, a stooped woman with trembling hands and eyes that had seen too much, whispered a scripture under her breath. The air was heavy, too heavy, and the smell of rain and iron filled the room. In the corner, a small oil lamp flickered weakly, casting long shadows on the wooden walls where crucifixes hung crooked, as if even they were trying to turn away. Thomas McAllister, pacing the dirt floor, muttered something about the harvest moon, how it was too red, too close. Margaret had been in labor for 10 hours. The midwife wiped her brow and said softly, "She's not ready to let go yet." Outside, thunder rolled like the voice of God himself. Finally, just past 2 in the morning, the first child emerged, slick with life, her cry sharp enough to silence the storm for a moment. Thomas exhaled in relief. Margaret, exhausted but smiling weakly, reached out a trembling hand. But before Agnes could swaddle the child, she felt another movement, a second heartbeat deep within. "There's another one," she gasped. Thomas froze. The McAllisters had prayed for one child, not two. Twins in those parts of Kentucky were seen as strange omens. One blessed, one cursed, as old folks said. The second baby came slower and quieter. For a dreadful moment, the room filled with the sound of rain hammering the roof. No crying, no movement. Agnes began to weep, whispering, "Stillborn, poor thing," when suddenly the baby's chest rose. Her eyes opened, not blindly as most newborns do, but sharply, intentionally, and at that exact moment, the first baby's cries stopped. Both girls turned their heads, perfectly simultaneously, toward the flickering lamp. The midwife stumbled backward, dropping the scissors. "Sweet Lord," she muttered. "They move like mirrors." Margaret barely had strength to look, but when she did, she screamed. For though they were not identical, the two shared an unnatural likeness, their pupils a pale, foggy gray, their lips slightly blue as if the same breath moved through both. That night, as the twins lay side by side, the wind outside calmed. But inside, something in that house changed. The fire dimmed. The clock stopped. The midwife, too frightened to stay, left before dawn, muttering about unnatural bonds and souls divided. In the days that followed, strange things began. When Clara, the elder by a few minutes, sneezed, Elise blinked. When one slept, the other stirred. Once, when Margaret pricked her finger sewing, she swore she saw both infants flinch. Thomas forbade visitors. "No gossip," he barked, "no witch talk." But whispers found their way through the fields anyway. The neighbors said the M.C. Allister twins were born on a cursed moon. Some swore they'd seen candlelight moving in the upstairs window when the house was empty, 2 shadows dancing across the curtains. At 6 months old, the twins began laughing, but never alone. Their giggles came in rhythm, perfect and synchronized, always followed by a cold draft that snuffed out nearby candles. Margaret tried to convince herself it was coincidence, yet she noticed something she couldn't explain. Both girls' eyes would track her together, like reflections in 2 mirrors facing one another. One night she tried separating them for the first time. She placed Clara in the cradle by the fire and carried Elise into the next room. Within minutes, Clara began to cry, louder and louder, until Margaret ran back. When she returned, Elise's tiny hand was bleeding, and Clara had a matching cut on her palm. The mark healed on both within a day, leaving behind identical scars. By their second year, the connection deepened. They spoke in patterns, not full words, but sounds that finished one another. "La," said Clara. "Zell," whispered Elise, like they were calling to something no one else could hear. Thomas grew more disturbed. Once he caught the girls staring silently at each other across the room, not moving, their lips parted, their breathing synchronized. He shouted their names, but neither turned. When he grabbed Clara's arm, Elise screamed as if struck. Then came the first death. A cow was found stiff and cold in the pasture one morning, its eyes open wide, body untouched. The same day, Clara fell sick with fever. As her temperature rose, Thomas noticed strange burns on the walls, blackened spots, like something had flared briefly in the night. Agnes Crowley, the midwife, returned after hearing the rumors. She examined Clara and murmured, "This ain't sickness, this is a tether." Thomas demanded what she meant. She only said, "They share what should never be shared." But the worst moment came when Elise disappeared. One night, while the wind howled through the trees, Margaret awoke to find only Clara sleeping in the cradle. The door was bolted, no one had entered or left. Yet Elise was gone. They searched the entire house, every inch of land around it. Nothing. For 3 days the family mourned. On the 4th morning, Margaret found Elise back in the cradle beside her sister, dirty, shivering with mud on her feet. No one saw how she returned. When questioned, Clara simply said, "She went where I dreamed." After that, the bond between them grew beyond human comprehension. They never separated again. When one twin was struck with fever, the other's breath faltered. When one smiled, the other's pulse quickened. Even sleep no longer divided them. They dreamed the same dreams, often waking at the same moment, finishing one another's sentences as if their thoughts bled together. In the winter of 1836, Margaret finally wrote in her journal, "My daughters are two bodies, one mind. The Lord gave them together, and I fear He will take them together." And she was right. What began as a birth that defied nature became a haunting question for generations. Can two souls truly share one life? Whatever the truth, one thing was certain. The night the M.C. Allister twins were born, something ancient woke in the hills of Kentucky, and it never went back to sleep. By the time the M.C. Allister twins turned 5, their strange connection had become impossible to ignore. Even the most skeptical neighbors, men who mocked superstition and swore by logic, crossed themselves when they saw the girls. The whispers had already begun, mirror children they called them. 2 faces, 1 ghost. Inside the aging farmhouse, Margaret M.C. Allister lived in constant unease. She loved her daughters deeply, but she feared them too. It was not the kind of fear born from hatred, it was the primal kind, the kind that grows when something sacred feels slightly wrong. There were moments when she'd watch them playing by the firelight, one whispering, the other answering in perfect rhythm, and she'd feel as though she were intruding on something not meant for human eyes. The twins, Clara and Elise, had grown into delicate pale children with matching gray eyes and dark tangled curls. They rarely argued. They didn't need to. Words between them seemed optional, thoughts passing silently, like wind through a window you didn't realize was open. One autumn afternoon, as Margaret folded laundry, she caught a glimpse of something that made her heart seize. Both girls were sitting in front of the hallway mirror. Clara reached out to touch her reflection, and Elise did the same, but from across the room, facing the opposite direction. Margaret watched as the mirror shimmered faintly, almost as if it rippled like water. The reflection didn't show Margaret standing behind them. It showed only the twins, and something faint between them, like a faint, distorted shadow in the glass. When Margaret gasped, the mirror cracked straight down the middle. Both girls screamed and clutched their chests as if stabbed. Blood bloomed between their fingers, thin, precise cuts across their sternums. The wounds healed within hours, but the mirror was never the same again. After that day, mirrors in the Mac Allister home began to behave strangely. Some fogged without heat, others reflected people who weren't there. The twins avoided them for a time, until one night, Thomas caught Clara whispering into the broken glass. Her lips moved as if answering a question no one else could hear. When he shouted her name, she didn't flinch, only turned to him slowly and said, "She's talking back now!" Thomas smashed the mirror with the butt of his rifle, but the damage had already been done. By winter, Elise began waking with bruises that she couldn't explain. Once, Margaret found handprints around the girl's wrists, small, identical to her sister's. "You've been fighting in your sleep," she scolded, but Clara only stared back, confused. "No, Mama," she said softly, "she pulls me." The connection between the girls seemed to be tightening, binding them in ways no parent could sever. When one grew sick, the other mirrored every symptom. When Clara sprained her ankle, Elise limped without pain. When one cried, tears appeared in both sets of eyes. Dr. Alden Pierce, who had been studying them quietly since their birth, began documenting these events. His notes, recovered decades later, read like the ramblings of a man teetering between fascination and terror. Their eyes respond to each other's movements even when separated by distance. The mirror is key. It is the bridge. When one gazes upon her reflection, the other sees it too, even from afar. He called their condition the mirror curse. In April of 1839, tragedy deepened the curse. The McAllisters' farmhouse caught fire in the early hours of the morning. It started in the parlor, where, ironically, Thomas had stacked the broken mirrors he refused to throw away. No one knew how the fire began, but Margaret swore she'd seen both girls awake minutes before the smoke filled the house, standing, hand in hand, staring at the wall where the largest mirror once hung. Thomas dragged them all out, choking from the smoke, but when they reached the yard, Elise collapsed. She wasn't burned, she wasn't bleeding, but her eyes rolled white, her lips murmuring Clara's name. Meanwhile, Clara stood perfectly still, staring at the burning window, whispering, "She's not inside the house." The doctor arrived at dawn. Elise lay cold, unresponsive, yet her heart still beat faintly, slowly, rhythmically. Clara refused to leave her side. At one point, she began breathing in unison with her sister, as though willing her lungs to work again. Witnesses later swore they saw Elise's lips move, though her body was still. For 3 days, neither girl ate or spoke. Margaret and Thomas took turns watching over them, terrified of what would come next. On the 4th morning, Clara awoke screaming. The sound was so piercing it shattered what remained of the window glass. Elise sat upright, eyes open, breathing, but she was not herself. Her pupils were pale and empty. When the doctor touched her wrist, she whispered, "I can see her in the glass." That same day, the family buried the last of the mirrors. But every night after, they could hear faint scratching sounds beneath the floorboards. Tiny fingernails scraping wood in rhythm, like something calling to be let out. Dr. Pierce's journal ends abruptly soon after. The final entry reads, "If one should perish, the other will live for 2, but her soul will not be alone. The reflection demands balance." What that meant, no one could ever prove. But when Dr. Pierce disappeared weeks later, the townspeople blamed the twins. His office was found ransacked, all the mirrors in the building smashed. Only one remained intact, hanging on the back wall streaked with soot. In its reflection, there were 2 small figures holding hands, though only Clara had been seen in town since that day. After the fire, the McAllisters moved away, hoping distance might break the curse. But wherever they went, strange things followed, mirrors clouding over, reflections moving a heartbeat out of sync, laughter echoing from behind the glass. Clara grew quieter as she aged. Sometimes she would talk to her own reflection for hours, whispering lullabies no one else knew. When asked why, she'd only smile faintly and say, "Because she listens." And so, the legend of the mirror curse was born, not from fantasy, but from the strange truth of 2 sisters who shared one reflection too many. The year after the fire was one of silence in the McAllister home. The once cheerful farmhouse, which had echoed with laughter and fiddle songs, had become a place of whispers and shadows. The air itself seemed to hum with unease. Every sound, every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the shutters, felt like a breath from something unseen. Clara McAllister, now 12, had become a ghost in her own home. She spoke little, ate less, and rarely ventured outdoors. Since the fire that nearly claimed her twin's life, she had changed in ways that defied explanation. Her reflection sometimes lingered when she turned away from the mirror. Her eyes, once full of childlike curiosity, seemed to carry an old, mournful intelligence. And Elise, though alive, was no longer the same child. Her body moved, her heart beat, but her voice came and went like wind in a graveyard. Some days she seemed present, smiling faintly, playing with her doll, but at other times she stared at nothing, lips trembling as if repeating words no one else could hear. Margaret tried to hold her family together, but the twins frightened her in ways she could not admit aloud. There were nights she awoke to find both girls standing by her bedside, their faces lit pale by the moonlight, holding hands in silence. When she demanded to know what they were doing, Clara would whisper, "She said someone is in the house." Thomas McAllister, proud and practical, refused to speak of curses or hauntings, but even he could not ignore what he saw. He once found the girls sitting at the old oak table, drawing in soot on the surface. When he looked closer, he realized they weren't drawing, they were writing words backward, perfectly mirrored. The letters spelled, "We are not two." He slapped the table in anger, shouting that it was nonsense. But the girls only stared up at him. 2 identical faces, one expressionless, the other quietly smirking, as though mocking his disbelief. That night, Thomas boarded up every mirror in the house. Still, the mirrors found ways to return. One morning, Margaret discovered a small shard of glass beneath Elise's pillow, smooth, gleaming, impossibly clean despite the dust that covered everything else. When she tried to take it away, Elise screamed so violently that her nose began to bleed. Clara, across the room, cried out in perfect sync, clutching her chest as if she too felt the loss. From then on, the family lived in constant dread. Margaret prayed daily, but her faith was shaken. The local pastor, Reverend Gentry, came to bless the house. As he recited scripture, the twins watched him with calm, cold eyes. Midway through the prayer, the candles blew out. The Reverend's voice faltered, and when he tried to relight them, the wicks crumbled into black dust. He left without finishing the blessing, muttering, "Some things the Lord himself leaves untouched." The town began to talk again. Children whispered that the MC Allister girls could see your death if they looked into your eyes too long. Farmers claimed to have seen their faces appear in well water or window glass. One woman swore that when she looked into her shaving mirror one morning, she saw not her own reflection, but the two twins standing behind her, smiling. Margaret stopped attending church. Thomas stopped visiting town. The world outside seemed to retreat, leaving only the farmhouse and its dreadful quiet. By autumn, the tension between husband and wife grew unbearable. Margaret wanted to send the girls away, to her sister in Georgia, where maybe a change of air and distance would help. Thomas refused. "They're our daughters," he said sharply. "Whatever this is, we'll handle it here." But Margaret's eyes had already turned hollow. "Handle it," she whispered. "How do you handle something that isn't human?" Thomas struck his fist on the table, but even his anger seemed small inside that cursed house. That night, something happened that ended all argument. The family was sitting in near darkness when they heard laughter, soft, muffled, coming from beneath the floorboards. It wasn't childish laughter, though it sounded young. It was twisted, choked, as though coming from a throat that hadn't laughed in years. Elise froze. Her hand went to her chest. Clara stood abruptly and said, "Don't go down there, Papa." But Thomas was already moving toward the cellar door. He carried his lantern down the steps, his boots creaking on the old wood. Margaret waited at the top, clutching her daughters close. Then came the crash, the sound of glass breaking, a thud, and a strangled cry. When he returned, his face was ashen. He said nothing for a long time. Finally, he set the lantern down and whispered, "There are mirrors down there, dozens of them, covered in soot, all different sizes." Margaret's breath caught. "We burned them. I thought we did." The girls looked at each other and smiled faintly. "She brought them back," Elise murmured. "She doesn't like the dark." Margaret screamed at her to stop, but Elise only tilted her head, her gray eyes wide and vacant. "She says she misses her face." That was the night the family stopped pretending. Thomas began sleeping with his rifle. Margaret locked the cellar door and nailed it shut. But sometimes, in the still of night, they could hear faint tapping from beneath the boards, steady, deliberate, like fingernails tracing the rhythm of a heartbeat. Clara grew ill soon after. Her skin turned pale as parchment, and her eyes dulled like smoke. The doctor could find no cause. Every night she woke shaking, whispering, "She's coming." One evening, Thomas found her kneeling before the boarded cellar door, pressing her palm to the wood. "She wants to come out," she whispered. "She says it's her turn." Thomas dragged her away, shouting for Margaret, but before they could move her upstairs, Elise began screaming in her bed, thrashing, gasping, her eyes rolled back. The boards beneath her rattled as if struck from below. When the noise finally stopped, both girls were unconscious. For the next week, they lay side by side, breathing in eerie unison. When Clara's chest rose, Elise's fell. When one sighed, the other moaned softly. The family prayed, but deep down they knew prayer was useless. There was no sickness to cure, no demon to exorcise. Whatever had bound the twins was older than either faith or medicine. It was something ancient, something that had learned to live inside reflections, and it was growing stronger. Dr. Alden Pierce had not set foot in the McAllister home since the day of the fire. He had carried the guilt of that night like an iron chain around his neck, believing his curiosity and ambition had somehow invited something into that family's life. But when Thomas McAllister's desperate letter arrived, written in trembling hand and blotted by candle soot, he could not ignore it. The letter was brief. "The twins are dying, or something in them is killing us. Come if you can. You must see this." The journey from Lexington to rural Kentucky took nearly 2 days by carriage. The October wind bit through Pierce's coat, and the countryside seemed unnaturally still, as though autumn itself had stopped breathing. When he arrived, the McAllister farmhouse looked like a ruin. Its shutters hung loose, the fields were overgrown, and the once white boards were gray with rot. Margaret met him at the door. Her face had aged 10 years in one. Her eyes darted toward the stairs before she even spoke. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. "They don't want you here." "Mrs. McAllister," Pierce said softly, "I came because I must. If there's even a chance I can help—" She shook her head. "Help?" Her voice cracked. "You can't help what isn't meant to live." Before he could respond, Thomas appeared in the hallway, his lantern casting uneasy shadows. His once proud stance was gone. His hands trembled as he motioned for Pierce to follow. "Come," he said. "You'll see soon enough." They climbed the stairs together. The air grew colder as they ascended. A faint humming sound, like a woman singing just beneath her breath, floated through the walls. It was impossible to tell where it came from. When they entered the twins' room, Pierce felt his breath catch. The two girls lay side by side in identical iron beds. Both were pale, their skin so thin it seemed translucent. But it wasn't their frailty that chilled him, it was how still they were. The only movement came from their chests rising and falling in exact rhythm, their breaths aligned perfectly, like a mirror image of one another. Pierce stepped closer and felt something impossible, a faint pulse of warmth radiating between the beds, as though the air itself was alive. He glanced at the space between them and saw, for just a moment, a shimmer, like heat above summer asphalt. Then it was gone. Margaret stood in the doorway, clutching her cross so tightly her knuckles whitened. "They dream together," she said faintly. "They speak the same words while they sleep, and when one bleeds—" She hesitated, then lifted Elisa's blanket. A small cut marked her wrist. She pulled back Clara's sleeve, an identical wound in the same place. "It happens to both." Pierce's rational mind fought to find an explanation. It could be psychosomatic mimicry, shared trauma manifesting. "Trauma?" Thomas interrupted sharply. "They write messages in their sleep, Doctor, words in soot. Things no child should know. Look for yourself." He handed Pierce a piece of parchment. Across it, in uneven black letters, read, "She's almost ready to come through." Pierce's hand shook as he traced the letters. "Who is she?" "They never say," Thomas whispered, "but they both claim she's their reflection." The doctor spent hours examining the twins, checking pulse, pupils, and temperature, yet every test only deepened his dread. Their heartbeats were identical, not similar, but synchronized, beat for beat. Their eyes reacted at the same instant to light. Even their tiny tremors happened in mirrored fashion. When he pressed his stethoscope to Clara's chest, he heard not one rhythm but two, a faint echo, as if a second heartbeat pulsed somewhere behind her ribs. At dusk, Pierce asked to speak privately with the parents. They gathered in the parlor, where the fading sunlight painted the walls blood orange. "What you have here," he began carefully, "is not an illness of the body alone. There's a phenomenon, something I've only read about in obscure medical journals, a kind of psychic entanglement between identical twins. Their physical states have merged to a degree I can't fully explain." Margaret's voice broke. "So what are we to do? Let them waste away together?" Pierce hesitated. If one were separated, removed from proximity, it might weaken the bond, perhaps even save the other. Thomas stared. "You're suggesting we send one away? Which one?" "I can't say," Pierce admitted, "but it must be done carefully or not at all." Before anyone could speak again, a sharp cry echoed upstairs. It was both girls screaming at once. They rushed to the room. The lantern light flickered wildly, throwing shadows across the walls. The twins were sitting upright now, their eyes wide and black as coal. Between their beds, the air shimmered again, but this time the shimmer took form. A reflection was appearing, faint but visible, a third figure, emerging like smoke from the surface of invisible glass. It had no clear face, only a distorted resemblance of the twins' own features, as if someone had stretched their reflection until it broke. Margaret screamed. Thomas raised his rifle, but the girls cried out in unison, "No! You'll hurt her!" The air cracked, and the lantern burst. The room plunged into darkness. When Pierce relit it, the shimmer was gone. Both twins were unconscious again, but carved into the floorboards between their beds were fresh words, "She's here." After that night, Dr. Pierce no longer slept. He kept watch beside their beds, filling pages of his notebook with feverish sketches of the mirrored form he'd seen. He no longer questioned whether it was real. He knew it was. He began to wonder if the fire years ago hadn't created the connection, but released it. Something from beyond had found a doorway through those girls. And now it was trying to step through, In the quiet hours before dawn, he caught his reflection moving on its own in the glass of his lantern. He turned it away, terrified, but not before hearing a faint whisper, his own voice but hollow and distant. She doesn't belong in the mirror anymore. The McAllister farmhouse no longer felt like a home. Every window reflected something it shouldn't. Even when the curtains were drawn, light seemed to bend strangely, as if something on the other side was watching back. For 3 nights straight, Dr. Alden Pierce sat awake beside the twins' beds, recording every whisper, every flicker of candlelight that moved where it shouldn't. The girls barely stirred now, but sometimes, in the stillness, their lips would move in perfect sync, murmuring words too faint to catch. At midnight on the 4th night, Pierce noticed something new. The mirror above the dresser, a simple rectangle of warped glass, had fogged from within, as though someone was breathing on the inside. He rose from his chair, holding his lantern close. His reflection stared back at him, but only for a moment. Then, a second reflection appeared beside his, pale and childlike. It was one of the twins. But both girls were still asleep in bed. He stumbled back, the lantern trembling in his hand. The reflected child slowly smiled, her head tilting at an unnatural angle, and though the room was silent, he heard her voice inside his skull. "She's almost here." Then the light flickered, and the reflection vanished. Pierce's heart hammered as he turned toward the twins. They were awake now, sitting upright, eyes open and unblinking. "Elise," he whispered. They didn't respond. Their voices came together, one word at a time, perfectly synchronized. "She is free." The glass of the mirror cracked from corner to corner. A low hum filled the room. Margaret and Thomas burst in, clutching each other. Margaret screamed at the sight of the mirror, the crack now spreading like a spider's web, glowing faintly from inside. "What's happening?" she cried. Before anyone could answer, the light within the mirror flared blinding white. The glass rippled, soft as water, and something began to push through. At first it looked like smoke. Then, slowly, the shape of a child emerged, small, featureless, but unmistakably alive. The air grew thick and electric. The lantern flame turned blue. Pierce felt his hair rise as the figure stepped from the mirror, barefoot, translucent, as if carved from mist and blood. Margaret fainted. Thomas raised his rifle, but Pierce grabbed his arm. "No!" he shouted. "You'll kill the girls!" The apparition's eyes flicked open, pale gray, just like Clara and Elise's. And then, for the first time, it spoke aloud. "I am what you tried to divide." Its voice wasn't one voice, but 3 layered together, both twins and something deeper. The floorboards shook. The twins screamed, clutching their heads in agony. The doctor lunged forward, trying to separate them, but his hands met something solid in the air, an invisible barrier between the beds that hummed like heat. The figure in the room turned toward him. It smiled, not cruelly, but knowingly. "You can't cut a soul in half, Doctor. It finds its way back." Pierce stumbled backward, horrified. "You're not real," he muttered. "You're projection, an echo of trauma." But the thing that looked like a child tilted its head. Science made me possible. Faith kept me alive. The lantern burst. Darkness flooded the room. In the faint glow of the moonlight, the figure moved closer to the twins. It reached out its hands, hands that flickered in and out of form like candlelight, and touched each girl's chest. They gasped. The air filled with a smell of iron and ash. For a moment, both girls levitated an inch above their beds, their bodies arching, light spilling from their mouths like smoke escaping from a furnace. Then, silence. When Pierce's eyes adjusted, the apparition was gone. The mirror had turned black, its surface dull and cracked beyond repair. Margaret stirred on the floor. "Is it over?" she whispered. Thomas crept forward and looked down at the girls. Both were still, eyes closed. He shook them gently, then harder. No response. Pierce pressed his ear to Clara's chest. Nothing. Then to Elise's. Still nothing. But when he touched their hands, he froze. They were warm, and under the skin faintly something pulsed, not one heartbeat, not 2, but a single shared rhythm, moving back and forth between them, like a current through a wire. He drew back, trembling. "They're not dead," he said softly. "They've merged." That night, no one slept. Thomas sat at the edge of the bed, praying aloud, while Pierce scribbled frantic notes by candlelight. He could feel eyes on him, even when the room was empty. The mirror lay shattered on the floor, but in each shard faint movements flickered, tiny reflections that didn't match the living. At dawn, the girls awoke. They spoke as one. "We dreamed of light," they said, and she said thank you. When Pierce asked who she was, they only smiled and answered, the part that was missing. In the following days, the McAllister twins grew stronger. They ate again, laughed again, but never separately. Their movements were unified now, every blink and breath shared. Sometimes when they stood side by side, their shadows joined into one. The townsfolk who came to see them whispered that they'd been touched by heaven. Others swore they were the devil's daughters. The Reverend refused to step foot near the house ever again. Pierce left Kentucky weeks later, but he never forgot the sound that haunted him as he walked away, the faint echo of two voices singing in perfect harmony behind him, fading slowly into the morning mist. He never saw the twins again. Years later, when a journalist visited the abandoned McAllister farm, he found two small gravestones under the old ash tree, one for Clara, one for Elise. Between them, a third stone stood unmarked. And though the farmhouse was long empty, the mirror in the upstairs room remained intact, gleaming faintly even in darkness. When the journalist looked into it, he swore he saw not his own reflection, but the faint outline of three girls holding hands. For 10 years, the McAllister farmhouse stood untouched. Vines crawled up the siding, the roof sagged under the weight of moss, and the wind sang through the cracked windows like a dirge for the dead. The neighbors kept their distance. Horses refused to go near the property, and children dared each other to toss stones at the front porch but never crossed the threshold. After the twins' deaths, rumors spread quickly through Fayette County. Some said the girls were buried alive, others swore they were never buried at all. No one could prove it. What everyone agreed on, though, was that the mirror, the one found unbroken in the upstairs bedroom, was not ordinary. It had survived fire, time, and storm without a single smudge. And though it reflected what was before it, something else always seemed to move in its depths. When the McAllister farm was finally auctioned off in 1845, the property went to a man named Jonathan Avery, a wealthy tobacco merchant from Lexington who didn't believe in superstition. He laughed at the locals' stories and promised to bring civilization to a place of fear. On the first night after moving in, Avery ordered the mirror brought down from the upstairs room and hung in his grand parlor. He said it was too fine a piece to be left to dust. The workers hesitated, but money has a way of silencing unease. By dusk, the mirror hung proudly above the mantel, reflecting the golden light of the fire. That night, Avery's wife, Eleanor, awoke to the sound of humming. It was faint, childlike, and oddly harmonious. She thought at first it was the wind through the shutters, but when she stepped into the parlor, her breath froze. In the mirror's reflection, she could see the fire still burning, but the room behind her was empty. No furniture, no walls, just an endless field under a red sky. And in that crimson distance, two small girls stood hand in hand watching her. The next morning, she told her husband. He laughed. "You've been listening to the servants' tales," he said. But that night, the humming returned, this time louder. By the end of the week, every servant in the house had resigned. They claimed the mirror whispered at night, repeating their names, sometimes in voices that sounded like their own. One young maid, Lydia, stayed long enough to see something no one else would believe. While polishing the parlor floor, she looked up and saw her reflection smiling before she did, her mirrored face twisting into a grin she hadn't made. She dropped her rag, screamed, and fled the house barefoot into the fields. She never returned. Eleanor begged her husband to remove the mirror. "It doesn't belong here," she pleaded. "There's something inside it." Jonathan, angry and embarrassed, ordered it covered with a cloth instead. "There," he said, "now the ghosts will have no audience." But covering the mirror didn't silence it. The next night, Eleanor heard knocking, not on the door, but from inside the wall. She pressed her ear to the plaster, and beneath the rhythmic thumping, she heard a faint, girlish voice whisper, "Let us out." When she pulled away, she saw something move beneath the cloth draped over the mirror, like a breath against fabric. The knocking grew louder. Jonathan, half asleep, stormed into the parlor. "Enough of this foolishness," he shouted, yanking away the cover. The mirror's surface was black, as though filled with smoke, And then, slowly, faces began to emerge. 2 first, then 3, then many. Some were familiar, others impossible. Among them, Eleanor saw the faces of 2 small girls, smiling faintly. Jonathan froze. "What trick is this?" he muttered, but his reflection didn't move. Instead, it reached out of the glass. Eleanor screamed as the mirrored hand grasped Jonathan's wrist and pulled. The sound of shattering glass filled the room, followed by a flash of light so bright it burned the wallpaper. When the smoke cleared, Jonathan Avery was gone. Only the mirror remained, its surface smooth, spotless, and reflecting nothing but darkness. Eleanor fled that night, barefoot and hysterical, found at dawn by a farmer miles down the road. Her hair had turned white. The only words she could manage were, "They're in the glass." The authorities searched the Avery home but found no sign of Jonathan. The sheriff declared it a tragic disappearance, perhaps a runaway debt case. The mirror, wrapped once again in canvas, was sent to storage in Lexington's courthouse cellar. But even there it didn't rest. In the months that followed, the courthouse janitor refused to enter the cellar after dark. He claimed he could hear knocking under the floor, and once, when passing by, he saw the canvas move. He swore he heard children giggling softly beneath it. By 1850, the mirror was sold again, this time to a collector of rare antiques in Louisville named Dr. Henry Marston, who specialized in occult curiosities. He dismissed the rumors as country superstition and proudly displayed it in his study, calling it the McAllister glass. Within weeks, his notes began to change. He wrote of echoes in reflection, unexplained duplications, and voices that call one's name with perfect mimicry. His last recorded entry, dated March 11, 1852, read, "They say the soul cannot be divided, yet this glass proves otherwise. I have seen my other self smile when I did not. I believe she will step through soon." Dr. Marston was found dead days later, slumped in his chair before the mirror, every surface in the room shattered except the glass itself. His reflection remained perfectly intact. After that, the mirror vanished from record, sold, stolen, or buried. No one knows. But in Fayette County, old farmers still tell the story of the McAllister twins and the cursed mirror that carried their souls beyond death. Some say it still exists, passed through generations of collectors, its silver surface hiding the trapped spirits of all who looked too long. And every few decades, when a new owner dies mysteriously near a mirror that won't break, someone whispers, "The girls have found a way through again." By 1870, the cursed mirror of the McAllister twins had become a legend whispered in old Kentucky towns, a ghost story told to frightened children or amuse drunken men in taverns. No one truly believed it existed anymore. Yet somewhere in a dust-choked attic outside Louisville, it sat waiting, wrapped in rotting burlap and forgotten among moth-eaten trunks. That is, until Edward Langford found it. Langford was not a man of superstition. A well-known historian and collector of Civil War artifacts, he prided himself on reason and evidence. When he inherited his great-uncle's estate, a sprawling plantation house named Cedar Hollow, he also inherited its contents. Among the old furniture, rifles, and silverware, he found a crate labeled simply, "Handle with care, McAllister glass." Langford brushed off the dust, revealing a mirror unlike any he had seen. The frame was carved from dark oak, decorated with twisting vines and tiny cherubs. But what struck him most was its surface, clear as still water, yet unnervingly deep, like he could fall through it. He ordered it hung in his study, directly across from his desk. That night, Langford began his cataloging work. He sat under lamplight, writing notes, unaware of how still the room had become. Outside, crickets had stopped chirping. The clock had stopped ticking. Only the faint crackle of the lamp remained. Then, softly, almost politely, someone knocked. Langford looked up. The sound had come from the mirror. He frowned, got up, and tapped the glass with his pen. "Old wood settling," he muttered. But as he turned away, the knocking came again, sharper this time, 3 deliberate raps. He stared at his reflection. Behind him, the study was perfectly still, yet in the mirror, something moved in the corner, a flicker of white, like the edge of a dress. Langford spun around. Nothing. That night he dreamed of 2 girls standing in the hallway, their faces hidden by their long hair. They whispered to each other, voices soft as falling ash. When he tried to ask who they were, they turned to him, and both had his face. He woke drenched in sweat. The next morning, Langford tried to dismiss the nightmare as exhaustion, but when he returned to the study, he found something wrong. His papers, once neatly stacked, were scattered across the desk. In the center of the chaos, someone had written a word in the dust, remember? Langford's hand trembled. He called for his servant, Thomas, to ask if anyone had entered the study. Thomas swore no one had. "Maybe you wrote it yourself, sir," he suggested, but Langford knew he hadn't. Over the next few nights the house changed. Footsteps echoed down empty halls. Doors creaked open by themselves. Sometimes Langford would catch the faint sound of laughter, two voices, identical in pitch, playing somewhere just beyond hearing. He stopped sleeping. His once orderly notes became erratic. The entries in his journal began to blur with paranoia. October 6th, heard tapping again. No source found. October 7th, saw movement in the mirror, two shadows, small, refused to look. October 9th, reflections delay a moment now, can't be sure which side is real. Then came October 11th, the night Cedar Hollow earned its curse. A storm rolled in from the west, thunder shaking the old plantation. Langford worked by candlelight, the mirror gleaming faintly behind him. At midnight, the wind howled so violently that a window burst open. The flame flickered out, and in the sudden dark he saw light. It came from the mirror. Faint at first like moonlight through fog, then brighter, illuminating the room in pale silver. He turned, shielding his eyes, and saw them. Two girls stood inside the glass. Their dresses were old-fashioned, their hair long and wet, as if they had drowned. One smiled, the other didn't. "Who are you?" Langford whispered. The smiling twin tilted her head. "You know us," she said softly. "You wrote about us." He stumbled back, shaking his head. "Impossible. You're dead." The unsmiling twin raised her hand, pressing it against the glass. The mirror rippled like water. "Not dead," she said. "Just waiting." Langford reached for the lamp, but it sputtered out. The only light came from the mirror now, glowing brighter with each heartbeat. "Wait, stop!" he shouted, but the sound was swallowed by the storm. The twins stepped forward. Their hands pushed through the surface like silk, droplets of mercury falling to the floor. Langford tried to run, but his legs froze. The air was thick, heavy, like invisible hands pressed against his chest. They reached him. The smiling twin touched his face. "You shouldn't have brought it back," she whispered. "We were sleeping." Then the glass exploded. Neighbors found the house the next morning. The study door was locked from the inside, but the floorboards were soaked as if it had rained indoors. The mirror's frame was shattered, yet the glass, impossibly, remained whole. Langford's body was never found, only his reflection. When the sheriff and coroner entered the room, they saw his image still standing inside the mirror, eyes wide, hand pressed against the inside of the glass. The coroner fainted on sight. By noon, word spread across Louisville the cursed mirror had claimed another life. The county sealed off Cedar Hollow, boarding the windows and barring entry. But every so often, travelers passing on the nearby road reported seeing a faint glow from the upstairs window on stormy nights, a light that flickered like candle flame followed by the sound of children laughing. In time, the mirror vanished again, stolen perhaps or reclaimed by whatever dark force bound it. But it left behind a legend stronger than ever, that once there were twins born in Kentucky, joined not by blood, but by something far older and far crueler than science could name, and that even death could not separate them. They had found a way to reach through the veil, and anyone foolish enough to look into the McAllister glass long enough would eventually see someone looking back. By 1895, the legend of the McAllister twins had faded into folklore, an eerie fireside tale for restless farmhands and wandering travelers. Most who told it didn't believe it was real, but in a quiet Louisiana town named Belle Reve, where the river mist rolled thick and white every dawn, something ancient had begun to stir again. The mirror, the same mirror that had once trapped Edward Langford, appeared one morning at a small antique shop near the Mississippi River docks. No one knew who brought it in. The shopkeeper, Eloise Fournier, found it leaning against her back door, covered by a weathered tarp. There was no note, no delivery record, no footprint on the wet ground. At first glance it looked unremarkable, old but not valuable. The wood was cracked, the carvings faded, yet the glass was pristine, smooth as still water. Eloise, charmed by its mystery, hung it in her shop window. From that day, strange things began to happen. Customers complained of feeling dizzy when they passed the mirror, as if their reflections were just a fraction too slow. One woman swore she saw herself blink twice, once in the mirror, once in real life. Children pressed their noses to the glass, laughing at first, then screaming without knowing why. Eloise brushed off their fears. She was a practical woman, alone since her husband's death, and thought ghost stories were for drunks and fools. But one evening, as she locked up the shop, she caught sight of two children standing outside in the rain, two girls in white dresses holding hands. "Darlings, you can't stay out there in this weather," she called, rushing to the door. But when she opened it, they were gone. Only the sound of dripping water filled the air. That night, Eloise dreamed of the twins. She saw them inside her shop, walking between shelves of antiques, their bare feet leaving muddy prints. One of them whispered, "We're looking for our mother." The other turned to the mirror and said, "She's in here." Eloise woke up gasping. The next morning, she noticed something horrifying. The muddy footprints were real. They trailed from the shop floor to the mirror and stopped right in front of it. She tried to wash them away, but no amount of scrubbing could remove the stains. Days passed, and the air in Belle Rive grew heavy, tense. Locals began avoiding the shop altogether. They said they could hear singing coming from inside at night. Two voices, soft and sweet, harmonizing to a tune no one recognized. The town preacher, Reverend Isaac Duval, came to bless the place. He sprinkled holy water across the floor, murmuring prayers, but when he turned toward the mirror, the water sizzled against the glass like oil in fire. "Miss Fournier," he said gravely, "that thing doesn't belong in this world." Eloise, shaken but stubborn, refused to remove it. "It's just a mirror, Reverend. It's the people who fill it with fear." But in her heart, she wasn't sure anymore. One evening, a young orphan named Lydia, who often helped Eloise with chores, stayed late to clean. When Eloise went upstairs to fetch linens, Lydia wandered to the mirror. She stared at her reflection, then frowned. The glass shimmered like rippling water. Behind her reflection, she saw movement, a pair of girls, pale and smiling. "Do you want to play?" one asked softly. Lydia gasped and stumbled backward, but the hand of her reflection reached out from the inside of the glass and grabbed her wrist. She screamed. The sound was sharp enough to shatter every lamp in the room. By the time Eloise came running down, Lydia was gone. Only a small handprint remained on the mirror's surface, pressed deep into the glass, as if from within. The townsfolk came with torches that night. They demanded Eloise destroy the mirror. She refused at first, then broke down sobbing. Together, they dragged it out behind the shop. One of the men brought a sledgehammer and swung it hard. The wood cracked. The frame splintered. But the glass did not break. He swung again and again until the hammer itself snapped. The mirror only shimmered, its surface glowing faintly like liquid silver. From inside, faint voices whispered, pleading, crying, calling names no one recognized. Terrified, the men buried it in the bayou beneath layers of mud and moss. For a while, peace returned. The shop reopened. The town breathed again, but 3 months later, during the spring floods, the river swelled and swallowed the bayou whole. When the waters receded, the mirror was gone. Reports began to surface in other towns. A family in Natchez found an antique mirror in a barn after the storm. A man in Vicksburg claimed his daughter spoke to her own reflection until she vanished one night. Every time the description matched: the oak frame, the carved vines, the endless depth of the glass. By 1900, the McAllister mirror had become a curse that drifted like a ghost from place to place, leaving madness and loss wherever it appeared. And yet, to those who looked deeply enough, a pattern began to form. Every appearance followed tragedy, every owner lost someone they loved, and every reflection, every single one, was said to show two girls hand in hand, waiting patiently behind the glass. Some said the twins wanted release. Others believed they wanted revenge. But a few whispered something darker, that the twins were not trapped in the mirror at all. They were using it. It was their doorway, their veil between worlds, a tool to reach out and find new hosts, new faces to wear. Every time someone stared too long into that silver surface, a little piece of them stayed behind, while something else looked back with borrowed eyes. Eloise Fournier disappeared the next spring. Her shop was found locked from the inside, the windows covered in a thin film of condensation. On the counter sat her ledger, open to the last entry. They asked again for their mother. Below it, written faintly in another hand, identical, delicate, childlike, were two more words: "We found her." By the turn of the century, New Orleans was a city balancing sin and science, where seances were held in parlors lit by gaslight and universities quietly studied the supernatural under the name of psychological anomalies. It was there in 1902 that Professor Elijah Warren, a rising name in the field of experimental optics, heard of a peculiar relic unearthed from the Louisiana bayou, an unbreakable mirror rumored to hum in the dark. Warren, skeptical yet curious, purchased it from a traveling trader who sold it under the name The Weeping Glass. The professor didn't believe in curses, but he did believe in energy, the way light could be bent, captured, and manipulated. He saw the mirror not as a haunted relic, but as a scientific mystery waiting to be solved. The mirror arrived in his lab wrapped in burlap, smelling faintly of salt and decay. As he unwrapped it, he paused. The glass was so clear it seemed not to exist at all. Only his reflection, sharp and impossibly still, stared back. The faint carvings on the frame formed a familiar shape, two intertwined vines, meeting at a point shaped like a tear. His assistant, Margaret Vale, noted something strange. No matter where she stood in the room, she could always see the professor's reflection in the mirror, but never her own. At first, Warren dismissed it as a trick of the light. He began his experiments by shining lamps and prisms toward it, recording the refractions. Yet the readings made no sense. The mirror absorbed light instead of reflecting it. His instruments picked up faint vibrations, like a pulse. Then came the sound. One night, while developing photographic plates in his darkroom, Warren heard a soft breathing. It wasn't the hiss of gaslight, nor the rustle of his papers. It was steady, in, out, like someone standing right behind him. When he turned, there was no one there, but on the mirror's surface, condensation had formed in a perfect oval shape, as if someone had exhaled against the glass. Margaret begged him to stop. "It's not reflecting light, Elijah. It's feeding on it." He laughed, dismissing her fear. "Nonsense. There's no feeding, only physics." But when he left the lab that night, the lamps dimmed one by one, and from within the mirror came the faintest whisper, "Don't leave us in the dark." Over the following weeks, Warren's obsession deepened. He began working alone, locking himself in the lab. He brought in a camera to photograph the mirror's anomalies. Every image came out black, except one. In that single exposure, faint outlines appeared, two girls, holding hands, standing just behind him. Their faces were blurred, but their eyes gleamed like wet stones. Margaret found the photograph the next morning. The professor was still alive, but not the same. His eyes were bloodshot, his voice cracked. He said he could hear the twins speaking through the glass. They told him their names, Clara and Elsie McC. They said they weren't dead. "They're alive in the reflection," he muttered. "They want to come through." Margaret tried to leave, but the door wouldn't open. The mirror hummed, vibrating so intensely the floor trembled. The lamps shattered, plunging the room into a pulse of dim red light from the embers of the gas flame. And then, movement. The surface of the glass rippled. Fingers, small, white, and wet-looking, pressed against the inside. They left streaks that looked like blood but smelt like salt water. Warren fell to his knees, weeping, whispering, "Show yourselves." The hands pushed harder, and faces began to form beneath the surface, pale, fluid, as though submerged. Their mouths opened, and a terrible sound filled the room, a harmony of screams and sobs, one layered over the other. Margaret covered her ears. "Elijah, stop this." He turned to her, wild-eyed. "They just need light. The reflection breathes light." He swung the gas valve wide open. The lab filled with a hiss. The flames burned brighter, hotter. The girls' faces in the mirror moved closer, clearer, and smiling. Then came a spark. The explosion shook the building to its foundations. Fire consumed everything, the lab, the papers, the cameras. It should have destroyed the mirror, too. But when rescuers arrived, they found the glass untouched, glinting amid the ruins. No trace of Professor Warren was ever found. Margaret survived, her hair turned white overnight. She refused to speak for weeks, until finally she whispered to the doctor who tended her. He breathed into the glass, and it breathed back. The mirror vanished once more, believed to have been stolen from the wreckage. Yet those who saw it last reported something new. When they looked closely, they could see the faint outline of a man standing behind the two girls, his face half burned, eyes wide in silent awe. And in that reflection, if one stared long enough, one could see the faintest ripple, as if all three were still breathing. By 1905, collectors across the South whispered of a relic that could record souls. It changed hands through private auctions, leaving ruin in every household it touched. Photographs taken near it blurred, clocks stopped, and sometimes, just sometimes, a second reflection appeared behind the photographer. It was no longer just a mirror. It had become a vessel. Some believed Professor Warren succeeded in opening a bridge between worlds, that he had found a way to let the twins pass through at the cost of his own body. Others said the mirror was now alive, housing more than just the sisters. It had absorbed every soul who dared to challenge it. Even today, preserved fragments of Warren's notes remain. The last line, scrawled in trembling ink, reads, "The reflection is only the beginning. Once it breathes, it remembers." By the time the 20th century gave way to the 21st, the McAllister mirror had become a ghost story told in Southern folklore, an eerie relic that no one truly believed existed. It was said to appear when someone desperate enough looked for it, bought in estate sales or found in burned-down houses, always vanishing after tragedy struck. In 2006, the mirror resurfaced in the quiet town of Waverly, North Carolina, in the basement of an old plantation house being restored into a museum. The workers who discovered it thought it was nothing more than a decorative antique. They carried it upstairs, cleaned the glass, and hung it in the main hall, unaware that they had just disturbed nearly 2 centuries of silence. The night it was mounted, the security cameras recorded something inexplicable. Every hour, at precisely 3:12 a.m., the motion sensors went off. Yet when the guards checked, no one was there. The cameras showed faint movement, like a shadow passing behind the reflection. The hall lights flickered, and in one frame, 2 small figures appeared, holding hands. The footage was deleted by morning. The museum opened weeks later. Guests admired the mirror's beauty, the delicate vine carvings, the smooth surface that seemed impossibly perfect for something so old. Some visitors joked that the mirror didn't like cameras. Photos taken near it always came out blurred or distorted, with faint double images. But one photograph caused a stir. A local reporter, Alice Kettering, took a picture of the hall for an article. When she developed it, she noticed something wrong. A pair of girls standing just behind her in the reflection, even though the room had been empty. Their faces were pale, eyes wide and cold. Behind them, barely visible, was the faint outline of a man's face, burned and smiling. Alice thought it was a trick of light, but that night she began hearing whispers in her apartment. Soft, childlike voices murmured her name. Her mirror fogged over as though someone was breathing on the other side. The next morning she called the museum director to ask about the mirror's origin. He hesitated before answering. "It came from the Louisiana bayou," he said quietly. "Some say it's cursed, but curses don't exist, right?" Alice laughed nervously. "Right. That was the last call she ever made. When police found her 2 days later, her apartment was locked from the inside. Every reflective surface, the TV, the windows, the picture frames, had been covered with sheets or turned to the wall. In the bathroom, the mirror had been shattered. Scrawled across the floor in trembling handwriting were 4 words: "They want to come through." After the tragedy, the museum closed the exhibit. The mirror was taken down, wrapped, and locked in storage. But the workers who handled it refused to return. They said they could hear faint tapping coming from inside the crate, as if someone were knocking to be let out. The director decided to donate it to a university research department in Charleston, hoping to wash his hands of the superstition. The truck driver who transported it never reached his destination. The truck was found abandoned by the roadside, doors open, engine running. The driver's seat was empty, but on the rearview mirror 2 small handprints were visible in the dust. Since then, the mirror's whereabouts have been unknown. But strange reports have surfaced online, stories of an antique mirror listed briefly on auction sites, disappearing hours later. A mirror that shows people behind you who aren't really there. Some say it appears in antique fairs under different names. The silent glass, the reflection that breathes, the mirror of the McAllisters. Every version ends the same. Someone buys it, someone vanishes, and a new legend begins. A team of paranormal researchers in 2012 tried to trace the mirror's origins. Their investigation uncovered forgotten records from Kentucky, the McAllister birth certificate, the midwife's letter, and the missing pages of Dr. Alden Pierce's journal. His last entry read, "The twins were never separate souls. They were one divided by grief, two bodies, one shadow. When one died, the shadow found a new reflection." The researchers compared handwriting samples across decades, letters from Louisiana, Charleston, and even as far as Massachusetts, and found chilling similarities. The same looping signature appeared, Clara E.M.C. Allister, always signed by someone who claimed to have found the mirror. One of the researchers, Dr. Helena Wright, later confessed that she had taken a fragment of the mirror's frame from a private collection. She believed it could prove that psychic energy could linger in objects. A week after giving her interview, she vanished from her locked office. Her computer screen, left on, displayed a single sentence typed repeatedly, "Reflections remember." Her colleagues found her phone beside her desk, still recording audio. The final moments contained faint breathing, followed by the sound of small footsteps and two soft voices whispering in unison, "It's your turn. Now." Nearly 2 centuries after the M.C. Allister twins were born in the Kentucky hills, the legend continues to spread. Every few years, another sighting surfaces, a mirror too perfect, too old, too silent, and those who stare too long into it swear the reflection lags for just a moment, just long enough for the glass to breathe back. Historians argue it's a myth, a Southern Gothic tale born from superstition. But locals in Waverly still leave their mirrors covered on certain nights. They claim that at 3:12 a.m., when the moonlight hits just right, the glass whispers. And if you listen long enough, you can hear 2 little girls laughing. Some say they're looking for their mother. Others say they're looking for the next reflection. Either way, once they find you, you never look the same again.